Once again, Christian greetings to all our valued listeners and viewers throughout the whole world, even more particularly to all Shepherd's Rod believers, and most especially to our beloved brothers and sisters in the United States of America. Special greetings to our brethren in Colorado, our brethren in Georgia, in Kansas, in Missouri, in Texas, Chicago, Illinois, in Arkansas, in California, in New York, in Pennsylvania, in Canada, Fiji Island, Mexico, Spain, Africa, Kenya, Pakistan, Zambia, to the United Kingdom, to our brethren in Australia, and also to our brethren in Malaysia, and Indonesia, and Papua New Guinea, and to the rest of the 144,000 living saints scattered abroad. Greetings. May the good Lord bless you, my dear brothers and sisters. This is our special episode number 48, just an hour exposition of the prophecy as the last final warning message just prior to the close of provision. Still, we focus our attention to the subject concerning the 11th hour, the particular object in view in the parable in Matthew chapter 20. We already read on the old symbolic code according to 3 symbolic code, number 5 and 6, page 12. The 11th hour, the last hour of the symbolical day, is the end of the world. And according to answerer number 2, page 36, the end of the world is the harvest, which is also called investigative judgment. So it says here in answerer number 2, page 37, thus to all practical purposes, the harvest is indeed the end of the world. Answerer number 2, page 37. So the harvest is the end of the world, or the end of the world is the harvest. In tract number 3 on page 88, it says the judgment is the harvest. Tract number 3, page 88. So the judgment is the harvest. But since the harvest is a provisionary time, it must be pointing to the investigative judgment, not the executive judgment. Even in the parable itself, because close of provision was illustrated as the 12th hour sunset. So 11th hour is the last part of provisionary time in the parable in Matthew 20. And it is pointing to the last generation of men. Now, I would like to read again the statement on answerer number 2, page 36. It says, yes, according to the statement in question, the harvest is the end of provisionary time, taking place at, not after, the close of provision. And the fact that the investigative judgment acts upon one's case after his life career in relation to salvation has ended, and while provision still lingers, is another proof that the harvest is the last part of provisionary time. This accords with Jeremiah's statement, the harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. Jeremiah 8 verse 20. It shows that the harvest is a period of time, having a beginning and ending, and that during its time, men are saved. And early writings, page 118, reveals that the third angel is the one who does the harvesting, while Matthew 13 verse 30 shows also that the angels separate the tares from the wheat in the time of harvest. Answerer number 2 on page 36. So, the 11th hour is the end of the world, and the end of the world is the harvest. But harvest is the judgment. There are 2 judgments, the judgment that pertains to the dead and the judgment that pertains to the living. And here in White House Recruiter on page 21, it says, now that for the first time, the parable is ablaze with light, none but the eye that is hopelessly gone out in dungeon darkness can fail to see distinctly that the message with which we Seventh-day Adventists were entrusted in 1844 at the 9th hour is not the 11th hour message, not the message of the judgment of the living, but rather only of the judgment of the dead. So, to repeat again, the 11th hour message is concerning the judgment of the living. If you will look at the divine pattern in the judgment that pertains to the dead, there are 2 inspired messengers that had been raised by God. First, William Miller, the messenger that had been raised by God before the commencement of the judgment that pertains to the dead. And then, Sister White, the messenger raised by God at the time when the judgment that pertains to the dead is in progress. Now, I would like to read Jezreel letter number 2, page 2. It says, how will we get the message of the judgment for the living? Jezreel letter number 2, page 2. How will we get the message of the judgment for the living? The answer is clear to all. We will get it in the same way we got the one in 1844. Since it then came through inspiration and through God's own chosen instrumentality, it is certain that the additional message, early writings, page 277 too, is to come in the same way. That is, by inspiration through God's own chosen agency. Indeed, truth is never revealed in any other way but by inspiration. See 2 Peter chapter 1 verse 20. Here the sharper's rod is very plain that we will get it in the same way we got the one in 1844. Now let us focus first to the judgment that pertains to the dead, because the voice of inspiration says we will get it in the same way. William Miller is classified as the messenger, the first angel's message, the messenger of the first angel's message in the judgment that pertains to the dead. So let me read to you. 2SR page 181. It says, 2SR 181. The midnight cry was first proclaimed prior to 1844, and the coming of the bridegroom was Christ coming to the most holy place in the heavenly sanctuary for the investigative judgment of the saints. The investigation being in two sections, first the judgment for the dead and the second for the living. The cry must be repeated, otherwise we would have no present truth for the time of the judgment of the living. The cry for the living being of a greater importance to the world than the one for the dead, and as the virgins are a figure of the living church, the parable must have a direct application to the church at this present time, the coming of the bridegroom for the judgment of the living. But indirectly, it points back to the commencement of the midnight cry, the first angel's message, the judgment for the dead. The messages being of the same event, judgment, both for the living and for the dead, are called the midnight cry. The same is proven by the parable itself. So, we know that the midnight cry, in the judgment that pertains to the dead, that is the message delivered by William Miller. And it is also called as the first angel's message. Here on 2SR 238, it says, the 12th hour of the dial to the left represents sunrise, and on the right, sunset. The 6th hour in the light part, noon, and in 6 in the dark part, midnight. The message at the 6th hour by Miller is called the midnight cry. See early writings, page 277. So, the message that had been proclaimed by William Miller is categorized as the first angel's message and also called the midnight cry. But Sister White is categorized as the message or the messenger of the third angel's message. Here in General Conference Special on page 38, it says, the third angel's message, in its former phase, the judgment for the dead, was unfolded to the denomination by one person, the founder of the denomination, and that one directed other co-laborers. So must it be with respect to the message in its latter phase, the judgment for the living. General Conference Special, page 38. So this statement is plain enough to be misunderstood. That if in the primary phase, in the judgment that pertains to the dead, the messenger of the third angel's message is only one person, so it must be in the judgment that pertains to the living. Now, let us honestly and seriously deal this important question. Beti Hotep was raised by God from 1930 to 1955. What is the classification of Beti Hotep? Is he the messenger of the first angel on its final phase? Or is he the messenger of the third angel on its final phase? We need to base our conclusion to the word it is written, not by assumption. I remember the Shepherd's Rod plainly told us on Tract number 9, page 6, in considering the several scriptures bearing on this point and on the kindred points in question, we must base our conclusions solely on the weight of evidence, so that we may not only know all the truth, but also teach nothing but the truth. Tract number 9, page 6. or in the Great Controversy, 595, it says, before accepting any doctrine or precept, we should demand the plain, thus set the Lord in its support. Now, we already concretely established the absolute fact that if in the primary phase of the judgment, which is the judgment that pertains to the dead, there are two inspired messengers that had been raised by God. According to Jezreel letter number 2, page 2, we will get it in the same way in the judgment that pertains to the living. There must also two inspired messengers. Now, who is he, the messenger that had been raised by God prior to the commencement of the judgment that pertains to the living? The same with William Miller, categorized as the first angel's message. Now I would like to read the old symbolic code. 3 symbolic code number 1, page 9. 3 symbolic code number 1, page 9. It says, among Adventists, the term third angel's message is understood to contain the first, second, and the third angel's messages, but not so when we use the expression second angel's message. The shepherd's rod is using the term third angel's message to convey the fact that the proclamation of all three angels' messages are to be repeated. Hence, both are correct. The second angel's message is to be proclaimed again in the message of Revelation 18 verse 4. The first angel's message is now being proclaimed anew in the message of the judgment of the living. Malachi 3 verse 1 to 4. While the third angel's message is to be repeated during the loud cry, thus making for the reproclamation collectively of the third angel's message or three angels' messages. 3 symbolic code number 1, page 9. B.T. Hotep declared clearly that the first angel's message is now being proclaimed anew in the message of the judgment of the living. So B.T. Hotep is the messenger of the first angel prior to the commencement of the judgment that pertains to the living. But the shepherd's rod made it so plain, the third angel's message is to be repeated during the loud cry. Now, I would like to read again, brothers and sisters, 2SR 230 and 231. And I would like to say that you might try to read the entire shepherd's rod publications, but you cannot provide any single citation that B.T. Hotep claimed that he was the messenger of the third angel in the judgment that pertains to the living. There is no such statement in the shepherd's rod. Remember, our reading says that if in the judgment that pertains to the dead, there is only one person categorized as the messenger of the third angel, so it must be in the judgment that pertains to the living. So I would like to read again in your conference special on page 38. It says, the third angel's message, in its former phase, the judgment for the dead, was unfolded to the denomination by one person, not two, only one person, the founder of the denomination, and that one directed other collaborers. So must it be with respect to the message in its latter phase, the judgment for the living. So that statement perfectly corroborating to the statement in Jezreel letter number 2, page 2. We will get it in the same way we got the message of the judgment that pertains to the dead. There are two inspired messengers. First, William Miller, the messenger raised by God before the commencement of the judgment that pertains to the dead. And Sister White, the messenger that had been raised by God when the judgment that pertains to the dead is in progress. And to repeat again, we need to base our faith, we need to base our conclusion to the word it is written. And brothers and sisters, there is no such single citation in the shepherd's rod that B.T. Hotep claimed that he was the messenger of the third angel on its final phase. But categorically, he thus declared in 3 symbolic code number 1, page 9, that he was the messenger of the first angel's message in the judgment that pertains to the living. But the third angel's message, as well as the messenger, it must be repeated according to the reading during the loud cry. And it perfectly corroborates to the statement on 2SR 230 and 231, saying what is the message. The 11th hour message is none other than Revelation 18, the loud cry of the third angel. What is the 11th hour message? That is Revelation 18, the loud cry of the third angel. Now, our subject is concerning the 11th hour, which is called the end of the world, which is the harvest. And harvest is called loud cry. If you will read 2SR 173, it says, Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. 2SR page 173. Blessed are the dead which die in the Lord from henceforth. Yeah, said the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works do follow them. Revelation 14 verse 13. Which die from henceforth, that is from the commencement of the loud cry. Thus the word declares that some of the saints will be laid in the grave, even during the time of the harvest, loud cry. So what is harvest? Loud cry. But, brothers and sisters, the first section of the harvest is the sealing of the 144,000. Now, let us read again the statement in answerer number 1, tract number 1 rather, page 20. Tract number 1 on page 20, it says, Since the purification or the sealing came at the commencement of the loud cry, as we have already seen, the 144,000 are therefore the first fruits, the first to be sealed. When does the commencement of the loud cry? That is the sealing of the 144,000. Brothers and sisters, in this subject, I would like to focus first to the living saints, which is the 144,000 living saints, spiritual Israel. And also the foolish virgins, the living wicked. Remember, in our quotation in answerer number 2, page 36, B.T. Hotep quoted Jeremiah 8, verse 20. And of course, Jeremiah 8, verse 20 is referring to the foolish virgins. I would like to read again the statement in tract number 3, page 70 and page 71. It says, The second section of the separation thus being completed, provisionary time is close, whereupon from the wicked will be heard the horrible wail of doom. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. Jeremiah 8, verse 20. This being the dreadful experience of the tares in Babylon, in the second section of the harvest, there must, as a type, be a similar and precedent experience for the tares in the Laodicean church in the first section of the harvest. So let's focus first to the first section of the harvest. The tares in the Laodicean church. And of course, the reason why we study this subject is to completely avoid to be a part of that people that with bitter lamentation, they will cry out, the harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. Remember, brothers and sisters, that statement is the same with the statement on 2SR 183 and 2SR 184. I would like to read the statement. It says, Now, why were they unconcerned at first and very jealous at last? And then it says, the experience in this instance is about the same as that of the deluge. While Noah preached the coming of the flood, the world paid little attention to this message. But those who believed went into the ark at a given time, and the door was closed. Do not forget that statement. There was a given time. The same with the statement on the Great Controversy on 323, saying, Another kind of evidence that vitally affected my mind, he says, was the chronology of the scriptures. I found that predicted events which had been fulfilled in the past often occurred within a given time. Then it says, the events limited by these times were all once only a matter of prophecy and were fulfilled in accordance with the predictions. Now let's go back again to the reading in 2SR page 183. It says, While Noah preached the coming of the flood, the world paid little attention to this message. But those who believed went into the ark at a given time, and the door was closed. But not long afterwards, signs of Noah's prediction appeared, and as drops of rain began to fall, the wicked multitude became alarmed and rushed for the ark. But the door was closed, and they were left out. The door that was shut is a symbol showing that provision for the church had closed just shortly after the foolish virgins became alarmed. But it was not a change of heart, only the fear of losing out. Their course of action had left them without the seal. The man with the writer's inkhorn had passed them by. What a terrible mistake. What a disappointment. Almost saved, but entirely lost. When would be this prophecy will find its fulfillment? Jeremiah 8 verse 20. Here in White House Recruiter, let's read. White House Recruiter on beginning from page 37 and page 38. Tragically, those who now fail to fill their vessels With this extra oil, the additional truth, that of the judgment of the living, flowing from the golden bowl, will finally see their lamps flicker out forever like a guttered candle. Oh, in what consternation then will they search for the precious golden oil, and with what infinitely greater anxiety than they now search for gold and for prestige. But alas, then like Esau, though they seek it certainly with tears, they shall find no place of repentance. They purchase their oil too late. The door is closed when they reach it. And to their frantic knocking at it comes the terrifying reply, I never know you. Matthew 7 verse 23. Then is the harvest of the first fruits past. So the statement is very plain. Then is the harvest of the first fruits past, the fruits garnered in, and the tares shut out unto destruction. There in agony, to wail and to gnash their teeth. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. So Jeremiah 8 verse 20 is primarily applied to the first section of the harvest. The statement, then the harvest of the first fruits past, can be easily understood. The sealing of the 144,000 living saints is finished. The sealing of the 144,000 living saints is completed. Because the shepherd's rod declared clearly in 2SR page 165, it says, when this number is sealed, probation will close for the church. I would like to read the upper portion. Thus the 144,000 are those who are sealed in the judgment for the church, and with them the judgment for the living commence. Therefore, they are the firstfruits. When this number is sealed, probation will close for the church. So, let us strive with all our power to be among that special company, the 144,000 living saints, the 11th hour company, that when that number is sealed, probation close for the church. Or, in other words, when probation close for the church indicates that the sealing of the 144,000 is finished. Remember, in 1SR Packet Edition, on page 9, it says, how can one escape the slaughter? And how can one escape the slaughter? Unless one knows what the sealing is, what the marking is, when it is to be, and where it is to be. So unless we have a complete understanding what the sealing is, what the marking is, when it is to be, and where it is to be. 1SR Packet Edition, page 9. And I remember the statement in 1SR page 14 and page 15 saying, if we do not understand the subject of the 144,000, if we do not understand the subject of the 144,000, we may not be sealed. For it would be worthless to understand it after the sealing. It would be worthless to understand it after the sealing. And that is the attitude of the foolish virgins. They became alarmed. They were willing to pay the price. But at the time when the sealing is finished, brothers and sisters, this statement in 2SR page 147 is even reality. Saying, 2SR page 147, will you, brother, will you, sister, adorn yourself with the righteousness of Christ? Or will you wait a little longer until after the harvest is past? Someone shall utter the following words in great disappointment. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. Jeremiah 8:20. Shall you or shall I? So it's very important to understand the subject, the harvest, before the harvest is past. We read several times that according to tract number 5, page 74, it says, it will be noted that the 144,000 are called the first fruits, denoting that they are sealed at the beginning of the harvest. When thus the first fruits, the 144,000 living saints, are sealed? At the beginning of the harvest. In answerer number 2, page 36, it says, it shows that the harvest is a period of time, having a beginning and ending, and that during its time, men are saved. So, the harvest is divided into two sections, the beginning and ending. In what period of time by which the 144,000 living saints are sealed? According to the shepherd's rod, they are sealed at the beginning of the harvest. Tract number 5, page 74. Not at the ending, but they are sealed at the beginning of the harvest. So let us now ascertain clearly that particular period of time which is called the beginning of the harvest, which is the sealing of the 144,000 because they are sealed at the beginning of the harvest. Now, I would like to read tract number 12. So, hoping, brethren, you will not forget. Because as we continue in this subject, we will be getting clearer and clearer. And we completely base our study only in the word it is written, the Shepherd's Rod Publications. So I would like to repeat again, according to 3 Symbolic Code, 5 and 6, page 12, the 11th hour is the end of the world. And according to the Shepherd's Rod, answerer number 2, page 37, the end of the world is the harvest. And in tract number 3, page 88, the harvest is the judgment. But according to answerer number 2, page 36, the harvest being provisionary time, it is called investigative judgment. Because there are two judgments, investigative and executive. The executive judgment in the parable in Matthew 20 was illustrated by sunset, indicates close of provision. Now, let us proceed to our subject. Brothers and sisters, we should not, however, forget that from the baptism of Jesus Christ down to the close of provision is divided into 3 periods: sowing, growing, and harvest. And we read several times that according to tract number 3, page 65, saying, and though harvest time is the shortest of all the periods. So the harvest time is the shortest of all the periods. And we always emphasize, as stated in 2SR 118, that grammatical rule is followed in the scriptures, and it is one way to recognize present truth. The word shortest is an adjective in superlative degree because adjective has 3 degrees of comparisons. The first degree is positive. It is called short. The second degree is comparative. It must be shorter. But the word shortest is superlative degree. And superlative degree is used to compare at least 3 or more than 3. But in this instance, it points out to the 3 periods: sowing, growing, and harvest. And according to the Shepherd's Rod, in these 3 periods, sowing, growing, and harvest, the harvest is the shortest. We will no longer focus to the harvest that pertains to the dead, but we will focus our attention to the harvest that pertains to the living, because that is the particular object in view. Now, in tract number 3, page 58, it says, the 3.5 years from the beginning of Christ's ministry to his crucifixion being the sowing time. How many years the sowing time? 3.5 years, or 42 months, or 1,260 days. That is the entire period of the sowing time. So the harvest, being the shortest, it will not exceed more than 3.5 years. So the harvest must be shorter than 3.5 years. But we are focusing to the harvest that pertains to the first fruits, the 144,000, by which they are sealed at the beginning of the harvest. Because harvest is divided into 2 periods, beginning and ending. But the Shepherd's Rod plainly told us in tract number 5, page 74, that the 144,000 are sealed at the beginning of the harvest. Not at the ending, but rather at the beginning of the harvest. Now, I would like to read tract number 5 on page 88. It says, and finally, the only revelation pertaining to and coming at a year and preparing the 4 angels for to slay the 3rd part of men is, says the Lord, the year of my redeemed. Isaiah 63 verse 4. And this year, we know that the word this is demonstrative pronoun in a singular form. So there must be a specific year. And this year, pointing to the year of my redeemed, at which his people are redeemed, is, of course, the time of the sealing and of the deliverance of the 144,000. So according to the Shepherd's Rod, in that predicted year, that is the year by which the 144,000 are sealed, as well as the year by which the 144,000 are delivered. So we need to study closely. When would that year, that predicted prophecy, the year of my redeemed? And I would like to say that God, our Almighty God, merciful and loving God, has provided us different methods I would like to read that statement on 1SR Pocket Edition. On page 56, it says, "The eye focused to the light of heaven sees that Jehovah God, the super artist, has employed in the scriptures every method known to mankind by which to unfold the wondrous structure of redemption." You see, if we will focus only our eyes to heaven or to the heavenly sanctuary, God will show to us every method to make known unto us, to unfold the wondrous structure of redemption. Remember, brethren, that according to 2SR page 187, saying, the true worshippers in the earthly, 2SR 187, the true worshippers in the earthly who by faith look forward to the administration of the heavenly were credited in the books of heaven as worthy of life eternal. Who are they, the true worshippers on this earth? They are those who by faith they look forward to the administration of Jesus Christ in the heavenly sanctuary. And because of that, they were credited in the books of heaven as worthy of life eternal. Let me read to you here in tract number 3. It says here, tract number 3 on page 88. Let's read. Tract number 3, page 88. "Now we see that by testimony of prophets, by parable, and by ceremonial type, God has wrought the towering structure of fact." So in this reading, there are 3 chosen mediums employed by God to reveal the wondrous structure of the plan of redemption. First, the testimony of the prophets. Second, the parable of Jesus Christ. And third, by ceremonial type. So let's read again the statement. "Now we see that by testimony of prophets, by parable, and by ceremonial type, God has wrought the towering structure of fact that, number 1, the judgment is the harvest, the separation of the tares from the wheat, the end of the world. Thus, the judgment, the harvest, embraces 2 phases, 2 periods. The former for the dead, the latter for the living. That third, the one takes place according to the records in the books in the heavenly sanctuary, whereas as the other takes place simultaneously in the church on earth and in the books in heaven. And that, number 4, the very fact that the subject is now being revealed in its fullness testifies that we are just on the verge of passing out of the former and into the latter phase and period, and that we are therefore living in the last days of Earth's history. Now this is the question. Thus, the subject is now being revealed in its fullness. Brothers and sisters, it cannot be construed that because it was written by B.T. Hotep understood everything that he had written. The situation is the same with Daniel, with John the Beloved. They were the writers of their own books, but they themselves did not fully understand what they had written. In the Great Controversy 344, it says, even the prophets who have been favored by God with a special illumination did not fully comprehend all the messages that they had written. As a matter of fact, in Manuscript Release, Volume 7, 417, it says that each of the ancient prophets spoke less in their time, and their prophesying is in force for us. So that state must be applied to all the prophets who died. And the same with the statement in Volume 6, page 19, saying, mysteries into which angels desire to look, which prophets and kings and righteous men desired to understand, the remnant church will carry in messages from God to the world. The prophets prophesied of these things, and they longed to understand that which they foretold, but to them this privilege was not given. They longed to see what we see, and to hear what we hear, but they could not. This statement must be directly applied to the saints that will no longer to taste death. The remnant church, by which according to early writings, it points out to the church in the last generation. It says here in early writings 143, this remnant, existing amid the signs and wonders that usher in the great and terrible day of the Lord, is doubtless the remnant of the seed of the woman spoken of in Revelation 12:17, the last generation of the church on earth. And it could not be in the days of Pentecost. So brothers and sisters, how lucky we are, because we, the last generation, according to Spiritual Gifts, Book 3, page 26, the generation by which God designs to fit for translation without seeing death. God has provided us all the necessary information. The evidences are sufficient to establish the wondrous structure of the plan of redemption. We have the Bible. as well as the golden bowl. So, if the subject of the plan of redemption, as stated on tract number 3 on page 88, that it is now being revealed in its fullness, that is pointing to the book of Revelation. Because to understand the Bible is to understand the book of Revelation, as stated in 2SR page 9. But, accordingly, in 2TG number 12, page 30, the revelation is to be more fully understood during the judgment of the living. That is the promise. And I love so much this reading in 1TG 37, page 11, saying, 1TG 37, page 11, those who are fortunate enough to have this revelation brought to them are the people. There is no other safe conclusion if God causes the prophecies to be written, sealed, and then unsealed at His will and at the time appointed. 1TG 37, page 11. So, I'm trying my best to study the prophecy in positive way, not on negative way. I am not interested to study the fate of the wicked, but rather the fate of the righteous. And the only reason that we quoted those portions that predicted event when the wicked will lament and mourn is to avoid such predicted event, not to be a part of them. I remember the statement in 1SR Pocket Edition. It says, page 5 and page 6, 1SR Pocket Edition, it says, its dominant doctrinal concern being the truth of the 144,000 and a correct understanding of it being a life and death matter to all, the rod unfolds it from several different angles. It's urging the denomination to prepare for the glorious deliverance of the saints and against the inglorious destruction of the sinners, as foretoken by the marking and the slaying recorded in Ezekiel 9. One is our Pocket Edition, page 5 and page 6. So, brothers and sisters, on our next episode, let us concretely establish the absolute facts, the word it is written, concerning the exact period of time that pertains to the harvest of the first fruits, the beginning of the harvest, or the year of my redeem. The only thing that I could say is that here in 1TG number 21, it says, 1TG 21, page 21, we may now intelligently choose to be with or choose to be tares. Or in other words, life is just but we make it, right? We are the one choosing our own destiny. In 1TG 50, page 15, it says, life is but what we make it. Brethren, it says in page 45, White House Recruiter, for worse or for better, brethren, you are now in the blessing light of God's word, left to make your own decision, whatever it be, though you will never have a just cause either to exalt or to blame another for it. The responsibility is now entirely yours. So, this is the statement in 1TG 21, page 21. We may now intelligently choose to be with or choose to be tares. If after knowing this truth, so after we completed this subject, the 11th hour, if after knowing this truth, some choose to be tares, they of course will have gained nothing and need not be surprised when they land in hell. Thank you very much for listening and viewing this program. We love you, brethren. May the good Lord bless you and have a beautiful, wonderful evening.